Well, fantasy football live show. Remember, we're on 5 days a week, 11 a.m. Eastern time. If you're watching live, you're on now. If you're on the replay, you'll catch it whenever you can. And that's what I'm saying. You can always, if you missed the show, come back and check them out later. We are off Thursdays and Fridays during the preseason. Regular season schedule will be a different 2 days. We'll let you know when we get there. This is on RotoWire YouTube mainly. I know some people are watching on Twitter and Facebook as well, which is awesome. But if you are on RotoWire YouTube, if you could consider hitting that like and subscribe button. It'll let people in the company know if the show is something that you value. And please follow me on socials at Jim Coventry NFL. You'll see on all the socials on and off things going, but Twitter or X, whatever we're calling it these days, I am doing player profile threads, 5 of those a week. You can catch up on those if you're a little bit behind, but I did put one up today on Drake London. And finally, stay tuned to the end of the show. Great friend of the show, Anthony Servino of RotoWire and the FF Faceoff. He'll be on to talk about players that he's targeting in 2023 fantasy football drafts. As always, we'll start out with the news of the day. And oh man, what a story is going on with the Indianapolis Colts news right now. Jonathan Taylor. So all kinds of garbage coming out of that camp. Jim Irsay completely alienating his player, maybe his team as the owner. Well, over the weekend, he has the meeting with Taylor on Saturday. They talk about, nope, we're not going to redo your contract. You're playing on your contract. That is what it is. Taylor clearly not happy with that. And then news surfaces Sunday saying that the Colts may place Taylor on the non-football injury list due to a back injury that he sustained during the offseason. Now, Taylor shoots back after that saying, I have no back injury. I haven't complained of back pain. We do know he's recovering from off-season ankle surgery. There had been a report that he did have a back injury during his own workouts. However, we're going to look at this whole thing. There's going to be a standoff. Look, Taylor, in my mind, does not have any real leverage here. First of all, if he holds out, it's 40,000 fines a day. Now, the players found the loophole, the hold in, where you show up but you refuse to practice. So that may be something he's able to work around. But if Jim Irsay, Morning Albert, if Jim Irsay plays the card of going with the NFI non-football injury list, here's what happens. So they pay Taylor what the $4 million or so he's due on. He's a second round draft pick, so he only has a 4-year contract. There's none of that 5th-year option as a second-year player. But they pay him, but his contract carries over to 2024, making him a 4th-year player again. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of poker playing going on here. But as of right now, if you're thinking about drafting Jonathan Taylor in drafts, it's scary because I've said this before. There are business decisions that players are making. And some of those business decisions can be, well, if I'm even a little bit hurt, maybe I'm not playing. And sometimes players will show up and they'll just do what's right for the team. But the running backs, they had that Zoom meeting last week, and the running backs as a whole in the NFL, they're furious with the way they've been frozen out on pay. And when you look at the franchise tag numbers, it's running backs are and tight ends, they're like the lowest paid. And obviously the tight ends, you have a few star tight ends, but they have a lot of blockers in there. But other than that, all the other position groups are making like $8 million or more on the tag than running backs are. Again, tight ends are not in that equation. They're low paid as well. So I don't know that the league is ever going to be able to make a move on this unless there's at some point that CBA is up, but that one's out for a long time. And I just don't see the running backs getting their own special treatment. A union kind of means one for all. And so it's going to be a very difficult situation. But anyway, back to Jonathan Taylor. Look, you draft him with a lot of risk. If you're playing in one of these tournament leagues where there's a jackpot, yes, maybe you take a swing. He's going to go in the 3rd round, I think, in a lot of drafts right now. And if he does, then you take your swing and you hope he plays and you get that big season and that RPO-based offense with Anthony Richardson. But realistically, we don't know what to expect. So there is a lot of risk. If you're in a regular 12-team league, just, you and your friends, I don't know. Maybe I just pass on Jonathan Taylor right now because I don't want to get a second-round pick, third-round pick, and get a 0 out of him for a extended period of time. Jim Irsay is going to play hardball here. All right, Seattle Seahawks news is next. So Pete Carroll, he says Zach Charbonnet, their second-round draft pick running back, he's out indefinitely due to a shoulder injury. Gee, thanks, Pete Carroll. Pete Carroll, he is the ultimate injury optimist, but he also is very sketchy with information he gives. Indefinitely. It could be a week. It could be 6 weeks. No idea right now. So people who are drafting right now, and I drafted in the pros versus Joes last night, and the ADP for Charbonnet before that draft, it still was running back 33, pick 97. I believe in the pros versus Joes draft I was in on Sunday, July 30th, he went as running back 34, I think pick 104. And that was a tight end premium league. So that means the tight ends were pushed up a bit. So realistically, he was right at about ADP. So the fantasy community of in the pros versus Joes, they did not view the Zach Charbonnet as a needle mover in any way. So they were drafting him as he was. But until more conclusive news comes out, it's still going to be interesting. Now, Kenneth Walker had a groin injury, and he's missed multiple practices, but Pete Carroll said the ailment is minor. And that one doesn't surprise me because a lot of players, when you're coming in the beginning of camp, minor hamstring injuries, groin injuries, these soft tissue injuries, these do happen. And sometimes they're serious, but a lot of times they're not. And again, I said Pete Carroll is the ultimate injury optimist, but I think this one for right now, I think we can take him at his word. It probably is minor. It's probably a week or so, and Kenneth Walker should be fine. But again, navigating both Walker and Charbonnet in drafts is interesting. Kenneth Walker, we learned last year, he's a very talented running back with a lot of explosiveness, but there's a lot of boom bust to his running game. He gets stuffed at the line of scrimmage way too often, but then his big plays are glorious. And so you have that. When you bring in Zach Charbonnet, Charbonnet is likely, if that shoulder is okay, he is more likely to get those 3 and 4 yard gains when you need to grind it out. Now, Kenneth Walker, his overall body of work last year was very, very good. I still believe he has the opportunity to be in the lead role, getting about 15 touches a game, not the 20 or so we were seeing last year. And then Zach Charbonnet, I think he comes out, again, with the shoulder is okay, 5 to 10 touches a game, but that could change. And that could change quickly. But I think Kenneth Walker's going to get the chance. And if he's a little more consistent on those grinder downs, I think he maintains it. But if it's going to be the continuation of him being too boom or bust, you can't sustain offense with too many 0 and 1 yard gains. You need those 3s and 4s. So there is risk in drafting Kenneth Walker, but the fact that his stock has fallen 3rd, 4th round, roughly, depending on the draft, well, if he does improve that, he could easily beat his ADP, but there's a lot of scenarios of what we saw last year, and I'm going to repeat the 3rd time, the boom bust runner, that could get him lessened opportunity. And I wonder in the goal area that maybe Charbonnet being maybe a bit sturdier of a runner, and especially on the interior, that may be their preferred choice in the red zone. So I do think, hey, a lot of fantasy analysts say this. When you have 2 backs and you think they're both going to be factors, you take the cheaper piece. And so I think I would agree with that in this case. The cheaper piece of Charbonnet, yeah, I don't know what his work's going to be, but he's cheap enough where he's going, 8, 9 rounds into a draft. Okay, at that point, if I need a running back, and if he goes beyond that, great, but at least I should get flex value out of him. DJ Dallas and Kenny McIntosh are in the picture otherwise, but unless the injury to Charbonnet is significant, it would be one or the other of them leading the backfield and someone else chipping in. DJ Dallas is a very good, accomplished receiving back, but we'll see. how the rest of this shakes out. Hey, let's compete for a shot at $250,000 and a free RotoWire subscription. You can play me in the Beat Jim Coventry 3 NFFC draft. That's going to be Tuesday, August 15th, 8 p.m. Eastern. And if you want to sign up for that, that is linked to my Twitter profile at Jim Coventry NFL. You can sign up for that league. We can compete. This is going to be live streamed. You'll be featured if you're in the draft. We'll talk about you and your draft. Even talk about maybe getting you on one of these shows and talk about the draft. So definitely consider that. Let me know if you sign up for that. New York Jets news is next. Head coach Robert Saleh. So he's talking about Breece Hall and obviously the ACL week 7 injury last year. Says that Hall is expected back in a couple weeks. Well, the big problem here is, we know that they may bring in Dalvin Cook. Dalvin Cook was watching their practice on Sunday, and they clearly have talked with him, and they do have enough money to pay him something. I don't know if there's going to be an impasse with Cook's contract needs and the team's willingness to pay a running back. But if they sign him, it really makes me wonder what they really feel about Breece Hall, because my guess is if they need insurance, you could wait. But if you're really going to aggressively attack right now and go after Cook, I have to think the team has a heavy level of skepticism about where Hall is really at in his recovery. And so that makes it very tough because, look, Breece Hall, we know if he's healthy, he's a first-round fantasy pick. If he didn't have the ACL, he would be going off the board in the first round, no questions asked. I mean, no, not even blinking, right? But this really muddies the waters quite a bit. Now, Breece Hall, fantasymojo.com, is my go-to for ADP. I could get the last 3 days ADP, especially as we get into camp and these injuries hit. I want to know what those injuries are. They're affecting ADP. ADP is not my guide, but I want to know where the fantasy community is valuing players that are hurt, because there could be buying opportunities where I could wait a little longer on a player than I had before. It's a nice guide to have. But again, check out Fantasy Mojo. But anyway, they have Breece Hall as the running back 11 and pick 30. I just cannot commit with this uncertainty at running back 11 this early in a draft. So as much as I love Breece Hall, the player, I just cannot get investment in him right now. Hey, I'm a commissioner of many leagues, but there's a specific 12-team league that I run, and the participants in that league, and they're spread all over the United States, different time zones, 4 of them actually, and spouses and kids, a lot of us have. So it's a real struggle to find a date to put that draft on the board for everybody. So I did get set up with RotoWire with this tool called the Scheduler. So you can get it at rotowire.com/scheduler, and it'll help you to make sure you can get all your participants in your league on the same page so that you are ready to go with a draft date that works for everybody. So give that a shot. All right. I am now going to talk about the 3 quarterbacks you need to avoid in 2023 drafts. Now, I want to preface this. I really believe the fantasy community has shown this through drafts, and you're aware of this because I know you're drafting. If you're watching the show, you are a drafter, and you understand that this year, the quarterbacks that are considered the strong type, they've been pushed way up. Matter of fact, in the FFPC Pros versus Joes draft that was in last night, I want to say that 7 quarterbacks were off the board by the end of the 4th round, and it was 9, I believe, by the end of the 5th. And that is the way drafts are going. We've had other years where there have been some teases in June and July drafts, and then come August, and then everything just kind of goes back to status quo. Quarterbacks are devalued. Running backs shoot up the board. This year, it's not happening. That is not going to happen. This is going to be the new landscape. So this year, it's all about getting one of what I call the top 9 quarterbacks. And if you want to go with a high premium draft pick, 2nd, 3rd round, then you could go in at Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, any order, and you can go to that well. I just don't like my roster builds when I'm taking the quarterback there, which is the only reason I'm avoiding them. I love all 3 of those quarterbacks, but some people like to get that quarterback edge. And so definitely that's a smart route for you to go. And then there's the next tier of quarterbacks. And again, you can mix and match these players. And if I'm in many drafts, I'm splitting up my shares, but that group goes Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, Justin Herbert, and Justin Fields. And you have 2 mobile quarterbacks in there. You have 2 more traditional passers. So some may like one because maybe there's less injury risk with the Joe Burrow and the Justin Herbert, and I know Joe Burrow has a calf right now, 6 weeks till opener from when he got hurt. That should be fine. And maybe the mobile quarterback, so you might like the upside of Lamar Jackson and Justin Fields, because Justin Fields had the second most rushing yards by a quarterback in history last year, and we know what Lamar Jackson could do. So in that pool, so that's the first 7. So a lot of people just like that tier, and that tier is accessible. Which again, you want those 4 quarterbacks, you probably got to go rounds 4 or 5 to get them, and they could get pushed up even into the 3rd at times, but usually 4th and 5th. And then there's a 2 quarterback tier, and I think that rounds it out. Trevor Lawrence, I believe he's on the track to becoming a star. And I also believe that the offense around him, I believe that Calvin Ridley addition is going to help round out that offense more. They have Kirk in the middle of the field, Evan Ingram. I'm very hopeful they get Travis Etienne involved as a receiver, because he would give another layer to that offensive explosiveness that they really could utilize. So Trevor Lawrence is in that 8-9 bucket. And then Deshaun Watson, again, whatever. I mean, personally, as a human being, disgusted by what he did, but I'll say this. I've said this on many occasions. Last year, he was terrible, but I believe he didn't get the speed of the game back after almost 2 years away. He's 28 years old. That is coming back this year. And he is an elite quarterback. He has been an elite quarterback. He has Amari Cooper, Elijah Moore, Donovan Peoples-Jones, David Njoku, a very good offensive line. And I do think that even though they've been a Nick Chubb-centric run-based offense, I believe they are trying to compete for a Super Bowl. All teams are. I know every team is. I get it, but they really are. And I think to do that, you've got to get in this era and pass the football. So I think we're going to see a lot more 3 receiver sets to emphasize the $250 million guaranteed they poured into Watson. But that's going to make life easier for Nick Chubb as well. So again, in that bucket of 8-9 quarterbacks, it's Lawrence and Watson. And I think that Watson is the one of those 2 who could drastically outperform his ADP. I think Lawrence has a safer floor, but I don't think he has access to the ceiling that Deshaun Watson has. We've seen Deshaun Watson finish as a top 3 or 4 quarterback in the past, and I know his competition's a little different now, but he is that guy, and the situation in Cleveland is way more healthy than the team he had around him in Houston. So that's framing this out. So the quarterbacks I would say I'm out on is because I'm saying this because these guys are being drafted as either quarterback 1s in the bottom tier or in that top tier of quarterback 2s. And so these players are a void, because I want you to see the differences between this group of quarterbacks and the quarterbacks I mentioned before, and why the value is getting one of those top 9. So the first one, and again, I'm going to be so true about this, Dak Prescott's like one of my favorite quarterbacks. He is like a machine in the pocket. I mean, he stands in, he reads the defense, he goes through his check downs. He could get through 4 check downs on some plays. He just knows how to play that position, and he works it so well. And points per game in the last 3 years, because he's missed some time, he was the quarterback 5 on points per game 1 year, 7 in there. He had a 1 a few years ago, but that was the year he got hurt early, broke his leg, and missed most of the season. But so that was like a real small sample size. But last year, so Mike McCarthy obviously is the coach, and he did have Kellen Moore, which actually helped them a bit. They're going to go this year to Brian Schottenheimer, and that does not excite me at all. And Mike McCarthy's talking about how they want to run the ball. And remember in Green Bay, when he had Aaron Rodgers, they would get out to leads and they would just ice the ball. And it cost them that playoff game against Seattle. They went so conservative and they lost the game because of Mike McCarthy. And he never learned from that stuff. Robert Stone. Yeah. So I will answer this question about Texas is pertinent right now. The offensive line right now will be fine. Zach Martin is doing his holdout. Dallas usually pays their guys. If somebody's a star and they ask for money, Jerry Jones gets it done. Zach Martin is 90% likely to get paid. The rest of the line, look, that line it's not the superstar line it was, okay? Tyron Smith, I know he's always one injury away, and we know that's coming, but the rest of the line is solid. It's not a great line. Center Biadasz hasn't been as good as we would have liked. Terrence Steele's been a good tackle for them. So overall, this line is above average. So that part's not an issue. And they played well enough last year too. So this is not a problem. And the longer Tyron Smith stays healthy, it raises the ceiling. But I think they've already learned to live without him because they miss him for so much. So last year, Dak only hits 300 yards once in 12 games. Now, he did throw over 259 times, but those ceiling games weren't there. Now, he was getting multiple touchdowns. 9 of his last 11, he threw those in, so we were fine there. And in the past, we've seen Dak as a goal line runner, and he doesn't really run much more, which is probably good. But actually, in 5 of his last 7 games, he did get to that 20-yard rushing mark, which is something. So it was a little more, a couple of years removed from that broken leg he had. So he was running a little bit more. Again, it's not like, Patrick Mahomes rushing yards, but it's at least having a little something. Now, last year, he throws 23 touchdowns, 15 picks, worst of his career ratio. And as we look at Dak, the interceptions, and Dak was right. Some of those were receivers dropping the ball. It was a real problem. And some of the passes were tipped. But he still threw 15 picks, and a lot of those were on him. And I think a lot of it was outside of CeeDee Lamb. What did they really have? He had a catch and fall tight end in Dalton Schultz. Michael Gallup has not looked the same since the knee injury. So it was basically Dak didn't really have realistic weapons. So that was a problem, right? And so I think overall it was a worst case scenario. Now they bring in Brandin Cooks this year, and I am very excited about this. Brandin Cooks, in my mind, is still playing at a high level. And it was just last year, he was a disgruntled employee with Davis Mills as his quarterback, and things were just not going anywhere in Houston. And so it was like a lost season. But Brandin Cooks is still an outstanding wide receiver. He is not just a deep threat. He's shown he's been an alpha because he's needed to be in Houston because they didn't really have anybody else. So he could do many things. But obviously, he will be a very good complement to CeeDee Lamb, and that's going to help. Michael Gallup, I know the team is singing his praises. He had one big year, and I know he's been hurt. I just have to see it before I believe it at this point. I was out on him last year, and I just don't. I think that Dallas is going to run more 2 tight end sets than we want to believe. I know McCarthy did run 3 receiver sets often in Green Bay, but I think with Schottenheimer, and I think there'd be a little more 2 tight end sets, protect the quarterback, use some, maybe a little bit of play action, but use the run. And I think the volume of the passing game is not going to be great. And I do also want to point out that if their defense, which can be elite, they bring in Stephon Gilmore at corner. That moves Trevon Diggs to the number 2, which is a great spot for him. And then Deron Bland back from injury. They have corners who can play. And I'm missing up one name. But that, as I look at this, overall, that defense could be so good. Dallas might not need to score 30 points like they did in many years when their defense was awful. So I think these things all limit Dak's upside. Got a couple questions here. Losing Zeke. Let's see here. Is going to make it complicated because Zeke's Pollard. So, all right. Pollard, they don't want to run him between the tackles 20 times a game, but they don't really have much behind him. I have to think at some point Dallas dips into the free agent pool. And I don't know if Zeke will come back there because I think he's probably insulted by them pulling the money back. But there could be a point where he or maybe a Leonard Fournette, who not great, but I think they almost have to ease Pollard's carries because that explosiveness can wear down as the season goes on. So there's a little bit of a concern for that. But as of right now, as long as Pollard is fresh, the explosiveness will be there, especially early in the season. And they'll use him as a runner and a receiver, so that works out really well. And the Schoonemaker injury was a question that we had here. I didn't think he'd be a factor this year. I saw him as a 2 to 3 year project. Most tight ends are 2 to 3 year projects before they become fairly useful. So I think that that's something that was expected, anticipated. If you draft a tight end in the first round, it's a little bit different. Dalton Kincaid, has a different level of expectation. But I think all along, Jake Ferguson was the receiving tight end, very explosive. Way more explosive than Dalton Schultz ever was. That's going to be a massive upgrade. And then Peyton Hendershot can block enough. And of course, you can always get a blocking tight end. So if his injury is worse, you can always find a blocking tight end on the waivers, free agency, whatnot. You always find them there. So I think they're going to be fine. So I think Schoonemaker's more of a project. Hey, if you like this show, please consider hitting that like and subscribe button if you're on RotoWire YouTube. And remember, we're on 5 days a week doing this show, 11 a.m. Eastern, Eastern. We're off Thursday and Friday in the preseason. Please give me a follow on Twitter at Jim Coventry NFL. Don't forget, I'm doing player threads 5 times a week or so, and I'm trying to break down players, help you make your best decision when you're on the clock in your fantasy draft. Geno Smith's my next avoid quarterback, and it's tough because who doesn't love Geno Smith? What a beautiful season he had. At age 31, came out of nowhere. He had only thrown 34 touchdowns in 45 career games, and then he throws 30 last year. And obviously his career yardage, he was a backup most of his career. He started as a starter. He had thrown for 3,046 yards last year. 3,046 in his career, and then he goes for 4,200 last year. Now, it was an incredible success story. I'm always scared off by a career year that comes out of nowhere. But in Geno's defense, Shane Waldron runs an offense that calls on his quarterback to be an excellent processor. And Geno Smith is that. But what the problem is that I saw definite inefficiencies in the second half of the season in Geno Smith. He caught the league off guard. He definitely did. And he took advantage of what he was given. And I know the schedule toughened up at the end a bit, but he threw exactly 1 touchdown pass in 3 of his last 4 games. And that was after throwing multiple TDs in almost every game before then. And also, he was held to 215 or fewer pass yards in each of his last 3 games. So it's very concerning. Now, I know they bring in Jackson Smith-Njigba, and they still have DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. And I know they improved their offensive line by investing in the 2 tackles last year, and they had decent seasons. But I still think that defenses have film on what Geno Smith and Shane Waldron do, and I believe the line is not great. It's good, and I believe defenses, if you really can gum up Geno early in the down, and I think they were doing that down the stretch, I think that's very problematic for Geno Smith. So I know people are drafting him as a high-end quarterback too, but I think the floor could drop out and he could be more like quarterback 20 this year, because if that end of the season is indicative and, like you say, it turned midnight for Cinderella, it really could happen here. So, but yeah, so anyway, we had another comment about the weapons. Excellent weapons, but at the end of the day, what level of quarterback are you? And I'm very concerned that Geno may not be that. Hey, I'll be at the Fantasy Football Expo weekend in Canton, Ohio, August 11th to 13th. Everyone's welcome to come out to that. To buy tickets, you go to thefantasyfootballexpo.com. Now, RotoWire will have a booth. I'll be there, and I'll also be on some of the expert panel discussions. But if you go to the Expo weekend, make sure you find me and say hello. I'd love to meet as many as possible. Last, avoid quarterback. And this, for a lot of people, it's like, well, yeah, no doubt. But a lot of people are drafting him this year on narrative, and it's going to be Russell Wilson. He's going Fantasy Mojo ADP as him as quarterback 18. Now it's pick 168, but 18 is right in the middle of the QB2s, and a lot of us play in super flex leagues, 2 quarterback leagues. So there's the thing with Russell Wilson. The coaching was terrible last year. I'm not going to dispute that for a minute. Nathaniel Hackett was outmatched, outclassed, had no clue, and nothing was going to work. Now, but with Russell Wilson, and what was tough was I felt I saw a declining player the last couple of years, but he had that finger injury in his last year in Seattle 2 years ago. And so the question was it the finger injury coming back too quickly? Was it Russ? And it was really tough to know, right? Well, last year, and again, bad coaching. He did have weapons. He have Jerry Jeudy. I'm not sure quite what Cortland Sutton is at this point. I was expecting good things, but Russ ends up with a 16-11 touchdown to INT ratio, worst of his career. Completion rate, 60.5. And it was the second time in 11 years he was under 63%. So it was like a bottom out season. We saw plays where he just looked completely lost. He's throwing the ball to just open grass and like no receiver in the area. He just didn't seem to figure things out. And then he gets a couple good games late in the season. And so, but one was that weird season finale against the Chargers. The others, they were blown out by Kansas City. And then Kansas City, I think they took their foot off the gas. And then Russ takes advantage of that. Well, now Sean Payton's in. And so now I think people are higher on Russell Wilson because of the Sean Payton hiring. Well, he's a quarterback maker. Look, Sean Payton realistically did his best work in New Orleans, and he had Drew Brees as his quarterback. So Sean Payton, no question, he called brilliant game plans. And he used the screen game and the play action deep shots like a tool. He was beautiful. He's amazing at setting that up. But he had Drew Brees. So we really don't know what Sean Payton brings to the table without a Hall of Fame level quarterback. And I'm not saying that Russell Wilson isn't, but right now, today, he's not playing like one. And so here was the thing that set Drew Brees apart. Drew Brees was able to run that screen game that Sean Payton liked because he was, I believe, the best screen pass quarterback of our generation. And what I mean by this is you could throw a dump off or a swing pass, but when you have a designed screen, it's throwing the ball to exactly where your receiver's hand is at to lead him in the yards after the catch. And that was what we saw from one Drew Brees. Russell Wilson's not that guy. He could throw a swing and a dump off. He is not going to be that precise screen pass game. And so he still is that downfield passer, but that's his staple. And I don't know how Sean Payton is going to be able to figure that out. I don't think Russ is going to be compatible for the things that are going to need to be done. And I think he's going to decline another year further. So I am recommending that we definitely take a pass on Russell Wilson as well, unless he falls well beyond his ADP. And again, you're in that 2 quarterback league, and that's who's left. So I also want to tell you, if you want to see my fantasy football strategy articles, you can get a free trial at RotoWire by going to rotowire.com/Jim. No credit card needed. And if you're looking to subscribe for the season, forgetting the trial right now, this July. So today's the last day. If you're watching this on July 31st live, if you want 20% off a RotoWire, you go to rotowire.com/sale. But again, if you want that free trial, you go to rotowire.com/Jim, just an email address. You'll be able to get behind a paywall for a couple days. And after that, it'll just disappear and we will be good. Let's see here. And we are very excited now to bring in our guest, Anthony Servino. Anthony is an editor at RotoWireGambling.com, company I work for. Anthony works for. We're teammates. Again,
Yes.
We were somewhat teammates before. Anthony he does his best work at the FF Faceoff. Let's face it. We know that. We've been watching his show for years. I had a fortunate circumstance where I think an entire off season, maybe a little longer, Anthony and I worked together on the Wednesday show. It was just such a fun time. Anthony is a very sharp NFL mind. I always love chopping up football with Anthony Servino. Besides the FF Faceoff, the Game Day NFL, and I want you to know that
I'm not the Game Day anymore. It's really just the Faceoff and RotoWire.
Oh, thank you for updating it. Update that on your Twitter page too, okay? That's where I got it from. Anyway.
Well, it says former.
Forward. See, I can't read, dude. I'm old. Trust me,
okay.
Old people like me, not good. So Anthony was with the Game Day NFL doing great work there at the time, but now he's just FF Face. And again, RotoWire as well. Trying to get Anthony on more RotoWire platforms here because Anthony, as I said, is very sharp. He also, with Fantasy Pros, the consensus rankings, he was top 15 in 2019 and 2021. It's an odd number year, Anthony. It looks like you're going to place top 15 again.
I hope so. I mean, it's the most humbling thing in the industry is that ECR because you actually get ranked and graded on your performance.
Imagine that, right? Anthony, why don't you tell everybody, I'm going to have you pitch your work at the end, but are there any initial words you want to throw out to anybody before we get you started?
No, just happy that training camp's here and the NFL fantasy football year is going to kick off in just a few weeks. This is my favorite time of year and really happy to be back with you, Jim.
Excellent. I'm so happy to have you here. Anthony, as I said, he is a super accomplished fantasy football expert, and he is going to go over 4 different players who he thinks that you should consider drafting this year. You're going to always love to hear the why, and that's what I'm all about. It's about the why, right? Well, at quarterback, a lot of us aren't able to get those first 7 or so off the board, or sometimes we want a second quarterback. So, Anthony, Kirk Cousins in Minnesota. We never know when his last year is going to be there, but we know he's there this year. Tell us why you like Kirk Cousins this year.
You know, if you look at what Cousins did last year, QB 11 in fantasy points per game. He's actually done that in 2 out of his past 3 seasons, and he's been a QB 1 in 3 straight years as the QB 12 or better in that category. If you go back to what Kirk Cousins did in 2017 and 2018, he was a QB 6 in fantasy points per game. And I know back then there were not as many quarterbacks with that high rushing floor, but we know Kirk Cousins' ceiling is the QB 6. Minnesota, their defense, I think it's going to it's going to improve with Brian Flores, but they don't have the personnel to take that big leap. So going back to last season, they're going to have to throw the ball and to win games, throw the ball to stay in games. And when they get a lead, this isn't the type of team that I feel like you can grind the clock down because the defense is going to play so poorly. So we're going to have a lot of throwing at a Kirk Cousins. They bring in Jordan Addison, and I like Adam Thielen, right? We all like Adam Thielen, but Jordan Addison, light years younger. I think he's more talented, especially at this juncture of Thielen's career. And this kid, Jordan Addison's never going to see, I don't want to say never, but he's rarely going to see top end coverage. He's rarely going to see double coverage with Justin Jefferson on the field. So this kid's going to go running wild opposite Justin Jefferson. They have guys like KJ Osborne, who's a really good deep threat at the 3, and TJ Hawkinson. This is perhaps the most loaded arsenal of weapons that Kirk Cousins has ever played with. And now he's entering year 2 with Kevin O'Connell, and he was sensational last year in year 1. So I'm really excited about Kirk Cousins and where you can get him in fantasy football. 140.4 ADP at the FFPC. I think that's a terrific value. And if you're playing in these larger field tournaments like the Underdog Best Ball or the FFPC tournaments where you need points to win, the Viking stacks, like if you can get Justin Jefferson, obviously you need to have one of the top 2 picks to get him. And then Jordan Addison and Kirk Cousins, they're not that expensive. So
Not
it's
at
a very
all.
cheap, attainable stack with a monster ceiling.
Yeah, and I love that idea of stacking because, again, if some of you are in leagues or you're playing for a jackpot, a grand prize, and stacking is really important in those. Now, one more thing I want to point out, Anthony, is that so we expect the Vikings to trail a lot. And the good news for Cousins is his tackles couldn't be better. Christian Darrisaw really became an elite blocker. Brian O'Neill on the right side is very good as well. So you always like that when, edge rushes are coming, but Cousins should be relatively well protected. The middle is a little bit of an issue, so there could be some interior pressure. But with the receivers he has and the separation they can get quickly, I think that all works out very nicely. So I love that call on Kirk Cousins. Especially if you're waiting on quarterback a bit, that would be a way to go. And certainly in your 2 quarterback leagues, it would be perfect to have him paired up with one of the other top options. Anthony, we are going to move to the Washington Commanders backfield. Last year, we know that the early down running back, Brian Robinson, and then the passing role was split up, J.D. McKissick and Antonio Gibson, but McKissick was done for the season after 7 or so games, so he is done, unfortunately, a neck injury. I hope he's okay, but I'm clearly not back. So now we have a Washington backfield. It's a little bit different. Who do you like in this backfield and why?
I am pushing the chips in on Antonio Gibson this year. ADP right around the 100 mark, 97.9 in the FFPC, and I think you nailed it. No more J.D. McKissick, who's really that third down pass catching specialist. Brian Robinson, I don't want to call him empty in the passing game, but he doesn't bring a lot to the table there. So all of those pass catching opportunities should go to Antonio Gibson. He's also an underrated rusher. If you go back to his rookie season, which was his best campaign, he averaged 4.7 yards per carry, which was a career high. That was also his best fantasy year with 14.4 fantasy points per game. I like this Washington offense. Now, a lot is predicated on Sam Howell, but the backup plan is Jacoby Brissett. And we know Jacoby Brissett can manage an offense. Go look what he did for the Cleveland Browns. They were a respectable team offensively last year, and running backs like Nick Chubb thrived. So I'm in Antonio Gibson, especially if you're in a PPR league. I don't know if there's many leagues out there anymore that's not PPR, but I will take him over Brian Robinson almost 100% of the time.
Now, one thing I want to point out here is that Gibson, I believe, caught 46 passes last year. I forgot to put it in my notes here. And 46 is a good number. McKissick had 40 targets. Yeah. And honestly, Gibson, he's not just a dump-off guy. I saw him in, it's like week 16 or so last year. He ran a deep corner route, and he catches it for like a 40-yard gain. Remember, he was a wide receiver at Memphis.
Yes.
So, like Anthony Servino said, when you're looking running back 32, you're in a PPR league, and you need a running back for either a flex, or if you're really desperate for a PPR because you didn't draft a second running back, PPR points add up in a hurry. Personally, Anthony, I see Gibson catching 70 passes this year. Am I crazy?
I don't think that's crazy at all when you take the opportunity that's left over from J.D. McKissic in this offense. And again, Sam Howell's going to be under center. He could be checking it down a lot depending on the pressure that the enemy defense throws at him. Again, he had a pretty good game against Dallas, but that Dallas team was worried about the postseason and not so much beating Sam Howell. And I also want to throw this in there. In Gibson's first 2 years, he also scored double-digit touchdowns. So he has that touchdown ceiling in him as well.
Yes, and he could take anything to the house at any time. Anthony, I know you love the Dallas Cowboys, and I always love you when you talk about the Dallas Cowboys because you speak with even more passion than usual, if that's possible. So Dallas, look, last year, outside of CeeDee Lamb, passing game was tough. Dalton Schultz is a catch and fall guy. Michael Gallup, not the same guy after the injuries he suffered. And they really need some help. Who do you like in the Dallas receiver group this year, aside from obviously CeeDee Lamb, who everybody loves? And tell us this player and why you like him.
You know, Brandin Cooks, he was that wide receiver Dallas was targeting at the trade deadline last year, and he was ultimately the guy that they traded for this offseason to give a little bit of help to Dak Prescott in this Dallas offense. You know, if you go back to that playoff loss against San Francisco, after Pollard went down, there were no other explosive weapons, and that Cowboys, it was a one-possession game. Who knows if Brandin Cooks was there, if it's a different outcome after that Pollard injury. So Brandin Cooks comes over, and his career, I feel like, is a little bit downgraded because of how it went in Houston, right? The Houston Texans, he goes there. I think he had maybe one good season with them, and it's been a dumpster fire ever since, especially last year when I think he was mentally checked out. But Brandin Cooks is a guy, if you look in his career, all but 3 seasons, he's had at least 1,000 yards receiving. He had a couple of years with at least 1,100 yards receiving. Speedster, right? Coming out, he had a 98th percentile speed. I get that he's now 29. He's going to be 30 years old, but he's still a very speedy wide receiver. And I think this might be for the first time in his career, he's going to be the number 2 on an offense, because this guy, I was talking about Jordan Addison before. CeeDee Lamb's going to draw the top coverage, and a guy like Brandin Cooks as a 2 at this juncture of his career, that could be lethal.
You know, Anthony, I think him ending up in Houston for the last few years was a blessing for Dallas's version. And here's why. Early in Brandin Cooks' career, he was a big deep threat. Yeah, he was used there like often. In Houston, he was their number 1. He had to run many routes in the tree, and he proved he was able to do that. He became a more complete player in Houston, not counting last year. Last year, like you said, was a dumpster fire, but he became that. Now Dallas gets this version. If they want to use him as a deep threat on occasion, use him that way. If you need him on other areas because of the field, because of the way the defense present the heavy zones of the day, he can win there as well. So I think this is a great scenario for Brandin Cooks. So Anthony Servino is recommending that Cooks is going off the board. FantasyMojo.com ADP, wide receiver 41, pick 88. So you could get him in roughly the 8th round of your 12-team league drafts. Any final words on Cooks?
No, let's go on to this is the player I really wanted to talk about. So you want to just throw it in there?
Yeah, this is great because Anthony, every day I have a guest on the show, and I 4 players you want to talk about, and I think 4 of the 5 guests have chosen Darren Waller as their tight end. But it's good. But it's good because fantasy managers need to hear as much as they can. So hearing from different people, different reasons, that allows them to make their best decision on draft day. So I'm very excited to hear you talking about Darren Waller, who is being drafted again, FantasyMojo.com ADP as the tight end 6.
Yeah, I'm going to draft Darren Waller maybe as tight end 5, even tight end 4, depending on my roster build. Jim, you know me. I'm somebody who punts the tight end. I like going after those late round gems because guys like Waller, Mark Andrews, Dalton Schultz, these are the guys you draft late and they pop. But this year could be a rejuvenation year for Darren Waller, because the last time he was viewed as the wide receiver 1, right? The pseudo wide receiver 1. He's a tight end, but he's going to be the most targeted player on the team. He was that for the Raiders a few years ago, and that's what put Darren Waller on the map. Tight end 5 in 2019 in fantasy points per game, tight end 2 in fantasy points per game in 2020. I believe that Darren Waller, if he gives us at least 16, because he played 16 games in both of those seasons, he's going to cash in as a top 5 tight end or better. There's nobody in that Giants wide receiver room who's going to earn more targets than Darren Waller. We also know that who's a quarterback like Daniel Jones' best friend? Well, it's the tight end position. You can line Darren Waller up all over the formation. You're going to find mismatches, especially a wise coach like Brian Daboll. He's going to put Darren Waller in positions to succeed and make this offense succeed. So injury risk, right? Because that's really the rebuttal from anybody. Well, Waller gets hurt a lot. Sure, played 9 games last year, 11 in 2021. But that injury risk is now baked into his ADP, which is right around 54, 55, the FFPC. If Waller continued to stay healthy, if that injury risk wasn't there, you can make a case he's a 2nd or 3rd round pick. Now you can get Waller 5th, 6th round. And I think that's being a little bit generous. So one of the rare times, if I don't get Travis Kelce, I'm no longer punting tight end. But if I'm going after a giant stack, or if I'm in a tight end premium league, Darren Waller's my target in those mid-single digit rounds.
You know, before the 2 injury plagued season, Darren Waller was averaging nearly 100 catches, 1,160 yards, and 5 touchdowns. And outside of Travis Kelce, there's nobody putting up that level of production. Andrews had the 1 season, but that hasn't been repeated. And so, like you said, when he's going at his best, that's what you can get. Like Anthony said, the injury risk is there. And I always say, he's going to be 31 when the season kicks off. I believe the 13th of September, he turns 31. And I always thought that part of the reason we don't see a lot of 30-year-old players is recovery from injury is slower and slower as you age. But Anthony's already pointed out that the ADP bakes that in for you, so you don't have to pay the heavy freight. And if he does pan out, you might have yourself a league winner at tight end. Anthony, tell us everything you have going on and where people can find your work and keep up with you.
Now, of course, like you said, I am here at RotoWire Gambling Group, SEO editing, coming on here with you and, other shows with you, putting out awesome audio, video content. And of course, my show over at the FF Faceoff and at fffaceoff.com. We come at you a few times a week, right around 6 p.m. Eastern. And as we enter the NFL season, it'll be right around 5 times a week. And so really excited for it.
Give me your Twitter handle so I don't screw it up on you.
At The Real NFL Guru on Twitter.
Yeah, make sure you're following it. I know most of you out there must be doing that already, but if you're not, you definitely need to follow him. You need to listen to his show. Anthony is a treasure trove of fantasy football information. Like I said earlier in the show, my big deal is the why. Don't care about the what. Give me the why all day long, and Anthony Servino brings that for you. Anthony, I'd like to thank you for talking football with me. I'd like to thank everyone out there for joining us. Please join again tomorrow. We're going to be excited to have another string of big shows here. Jorge Martin is back on the show. Everybody have a great day.